Thanks for joining us today. My name is John Nelson. I'm Vice President of Operations at BBI International. With me today is Anna Simet. She is the editor of Pellet Mill Magazine, Biomass Magazine, and Biodiesel Magazine. And our special guest today is Jason Kessler, the president of KESCO. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, nice to be with you.
Yeah, and you're going to be on a panel at the International Biomass Conference and Expo coming up in March 14th through the 16th in Jacksonville. And I just have to note, I really like the name of your presentation here. It's Islands Are for Vacations, Not Pellet Plant Design. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, I'm going to hand it over to Anna, and we're going to kind of chat here a little bit.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks a bunch. Jason, welcome. Glad you could join us today. I think let's just start out. Maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit about KESCO and what you guys do in the pellet space.
Sure. Be glad to. Thanks for having me. So my background, I started out working for a pellet mill manufacturer back in the 90s and was, I guess, tasked with developing emerging markets in the wood sector. And that got me into the pellet mill business and the wood pelleting business. And, you know, I really enjoyed putting systems together. Can't explain why, it's just made me tick. And, and so I did that for several years at Bliss. And in 2001, I decided to start KESCO and to take that same process with many of the same other suppliers that I had partnered with on my systems and started doing it independently. So what we do at KESCO is, system design and integration, equipment supply, project management, consulting, feasibility studies, process audits, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So at IBCE, you your presentation, as John has mentioned, you're focusing on, viewing pellet systems as a whole rather than separate islands. Can you talk a little bit more about your presentation and what you plan to talk about during?
Sure. So one of the things that I have seen, and the first pelleting system that I worked on goes back in 1994, and and it was in the residential markets. And so as these plants grew and as the industrial commercial pellet market grew, people were looking at how do we put together these plants. And I can't explain exactly why. I think probably part of it is just breaking these plants up by quote unquote islands is a good way to have, let's say, in an engineering firm, be able to have this team of people working on this portion or island and this team of people working on this portion, and they all work in parallel flow so that they can get the whole plant designed within a certain period of time. I suspect that's what led to the island design. And I get it. I mean, I understand, I think, why that happened. The challenge is I've seen it time and time again where one portion of the plant is designed purely around that portion or island being as efficient as possible, which, if that's all you were looking at, is great.
Right.
but it doesn't necessarily take into consideration, what I do in this island, what effects does it have either positively or negatively on other aspects of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And so the presentation, I intend on using just some specific challenges that we've run into where, one portion was focused on, let's say, the dry hammer milling island, and what happens in the pelleting process because of what's taking place at dry hammer milling suffers. Or the flip side of it would be maybe what you do in the drying island, taking it down maybe an extra percent moisture than the norm, translates into improved hammer milling efficiency that you wouldn't have otherwise. So I really think that in order to maximize the efficiency of a wood pelleting plant, you have to start at the measurable. And ultimately, for these clients that are investing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in these large facilities, you have to start at the tail end and say, okay, what am I going to ship? How much am I going to ship? What are the quality standards of what it is that I'm going to ship? And start working your way backward from there through the process all the way back to the raw material coming in order to really develop the most efficient process as a whole, not just a bunch of efficient islands, if that makes sense.
It does, for sure.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. Jason, just out of curiosity, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen over the years in regards to plant design? When you're dealing with a customer that says, "Hey, I want to build something," how has it evolved? You've been doing this since 1993.
Don't hate him, John.
Hey, he already said 90s, early 90s. I think we can go back on the tape and check. But, obviously you have a ton of experience, ton of knowledge. What has changed? How have you seen this evolve over the years in terms of plant design?
Gosh, that's a long list.
Right. It's kind of a broad, and I can narrow down if you want me to.
No, that's fine. And it's largely it's a large list because it's a new industry. And when I say new, 20, 30 years is pretty new. When you're comparing it to processes that have been around for, 50 years, 60 years. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is people are finding areas that can allow them to be more efficient, but not hurt them in other areas of their plant. And so one example would be things started with chips, just your standard pulp chips. And those chips were reduced from big chips to small chips. And then they were dried. And then once they were dried, they're sent to the dry hammer milling island. Well, years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a big movement to microchips. So it was basically saying, let's take this chipper and let's get the chips smaller right there because they'll meet the size requirements for the dryer, which is nominal half-inch, let's call it. And so this big movement toward microchips took place. The byproduct of that was a phenomenon that can best be described as case hardening of the pellets. The best explanation that I've heard is from some elder lumbermen who have talked about their experiences in dimensional lumber facilities, in specific planer mills. And they talk about how if they try to dry their lumber too rapidly in the dry kiln, it really hurts their planer capacity because it's case hardening that board, and it makes it hurt. It hurts their throughput on their planing. What we saw is when these microchips were dried in the rotary drum dryer, they're still a chip. They're just a smaller chip. They're still a dimensionally small, dense chip. And when we were taking that product and running it through dry hammer mills to get it down to the particle size for pelleting, we were noticing terrible throughput. I'm talking like 35% reduction in throughput.
Wow.
And so what I've seen as of late, maybe in the last 5 years in particular, is people going back to perhaps a slightly larger chip at the chipper, so it doesn't put as much stress on the chipper and maintenance on the chipper. And then they're running it through green hammer mills. And the green milling process is taking that chip and exploding the fiber, opening that fiber up. So it's not just taking a big chip and making it a smaller chip. It's actually kind of making a fuzz, if you will. It allows it to be dried more efficiently, and it really improves dry hammer milling. Coincidentally, customers that have done that have also commented on how it's improved their pellet mill throughput. So it's these types of inner system developments, if you will, that have, people might have put in the green milling system to improve their dry hammer milling and drying efficiency, but the byproduct just all of a sudden happened. They say, wow, my pellet mills love this material. And that's how it kind of all plays together.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Good example, Jason. So we usually try to end these on kind of a fun question. As John pointed out, you've been, in the industry a long time. What would you say is the most head-scratching thing you've seen, in your time, or the most challenging problem? You don't have to be super specific, but anything worth mentioning?
Absolutely.
That
can be shared in this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's hey, I tell people often that anybody that says they haven't made mistakes in this business is lying to you.
Right.
And it's just that I made my mistakes further, more time ago than yesterday. But I still had to make mistakes to learn. And things still happen, and things still challenges still present themselves. And the most recent example of that is a dry hammer milling system. And this is one that I'm actually going to talk about specifically in my presentation. But, the specification on the fiber coming to the dry hammer mills was 10% to 15%. And never in a million years would I have thought the difference in throughput through the hammer mill would be as significant as it is between 13% moisture and 11% moisture. That 2% moisture can almost double the dry hammer milling connected horsepower. And so that's just one of the challenges that has presented itself that we continue to work through.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that. And I do want to give Jason a little plug here. we have in the most recent issue of Biomass Magazine that will also be in attendee bags at the IBCE. Has 5 questions with KESCO, and in it, Jason goes into quite a bit of depth on some of the issues that we've just talked about. So definitely be sure to check that out. And I think we'll call it a wrap. Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and really can't wait for Jacksonville and your talk.
Great. I appreciate it. And I really look forward to seeing you guys.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.